She was supposed to be done. 12 years, thousands of patients, and tonight was finally her last shift. She had already said her goodbyes, already cleaned out her locker, already made peace with the ending. And then the helicopter came. And the man they wheeled through those doors was so broken, so far gone, that 3 different doctors exchanged a look that said what none of them were willing to say out loud. But Olivia Hayes had never once accepted that look. Not in 12 years, not tonight. Subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I need to see how far this story travels. Stay until the very end. You'll understand why. She had been counting down for 6 weeks, not in a bitter way, not in the way some nurses counted down, scratching lines on a mental calendar with the energy of someone serving time. Olivia Hayes had loved this hospital. She had loved the work. She had loved it through the night shifts that blurred into morning, through the impossible cases and the small victories and the particular grief of the ones who didn't make it. She had loved it through a divorce and a cross-country move, and her brother's deployment and her mother's illness. Through all of the life that had happened around, in between, and sometimes directly inside the walls of Bethesda Military Medical Center's emergency department. She had loved it, and she was ready to leave it. 6 weeks from retirement, then 4, then 2, then tonight, her last shift. The overnight 11 to 7, which was the same shift she'd worked for the first 5 years of her career before she'd earned enough seniority to choose otherwise, and which she'd requested specifically for this last one because there was something that felt right about ending where she'd started. The overnight had its own particular quality, quieter, more deliberate, the hospital stripped down to its essential functions, the work more visible against the quiet. She had worked too many overnights to romanticize them, but tonight she allowed herself a little of it. "Last one," said Danny Reyes when she clocked in at 11. Danny was the charge nurse on the evening side, 24 years old, still in the phase of his career where the intensity of the work felt like a gift rather than a weight. He had the kind of energy that was exhausting at the end of a long stretch, and exactly what you needed at the beginning of one. "How does it feel?" "Ask me at 7, she said. "I'm off at 3. "Then ask me at 3, she said, and he laughed, and she hung up her coat and went to work. The department was genuinely quiet, which at a military hospital meant something specific. Not empty, because there was no such thing as empty, but the particular settled quality of a night when the critical volume was low and the pending cases were manageable and the staff could operate at something closer to a sustainable pace. Olivia made her rounds with the unhurried thoroughness she had developed over 12 years. The kind that looked calm because it was, not because nothing required attention, but because she had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that attention was most effective when it didn't announce itself. She knew every patient on the floor. She had made it a practice from her first year to know every name and every chart and every family member in the waiting room, not because protocol required it, but because she had understood early that a hospital patient was a person who had been temporarily reduced to a problem to be solved. And the most powerful thing a nurse could do was refuse to participate in that reduction. You called them by name. You remembered what they'd told you. You asked about the dog, the grandchild, the garden, the game they'd been watching when the symptoms started. "Mrs. Kowalski," she said, stopping at bed 3, "how's the hip?" "Better with you here," said Dolores Kowalski, 81 years old, former Army wife, with the specific humor of a woman who had survived enough to find most things funny. "The young one earlier, he kept calling me the patient in 3. I told him I've had a name since 1942, and I'd like to keep using it." "Danny," Olivia said, making a mental note. "Probably," Dolores said. "He's got nice eyes. He just needs some manners." "Most of them do at 24, Olivia said. "They grow." "You grew," Dolores said. "I've been coming here 11 years. I've watched you." Olivia paused. "Have you really? You used to apologize for everything. Every time you had to move someone's IV line or ask them to wake up for vitals. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. You don't do that anymore. No, Olivia said. I learned that apologies are for mistakes, not for doing your job. That took you 3 years, Dolores said. I was counting. Olivia looked at her. Did anyone ever tell you that you're unsettling? My husband told me that for 47 years, Dolores said with genuine satisfaction. I took it as a compliment. Olivia moved on, smiling to herself in the particular private way that 12 years of night shifts had refined. The small internal warmth that sustained you through the hours when nothing external provided it. She finished her first full round at 12:40, noted 2 items for the attending, updated 3 charts, and was on her way to the break room with the specific intentionality of a woman who had learned to treat a 10-minute coffee break as a non-negotiable clinical intervention on her own behalf. She was 3 steps from the break room door when her pager went off. The sound was not unusual. Pagers went off at military hospitals the way weather happened, with regularity, without apology, regardless of what else was in progress. Olivia had been paged in the middle of meals, in the middle of conversations, in the middle of the 1 minute of silence she allowed herself on the anniversary of her brother's deployment. She had answered every one. She looked at the display. Trauma incoming. Helicopter. ETA 9 minutes. She put the coffee down on the break room counter, unused, still hot, and turned around. Danny was already at the trauma bay prep station when she arrived, pulling equipment with the efficient speed of someone whose body had learned this sequence without needing to consult his brain. 2 other nurses, Marcus from the overnight team and Priya, who was floating, were already gloved. Dr. Sandoval, the attending on overnight, was on the phone with someone. The expression on his face said military and not routine. What do we have? Olivia asked. Danny handed her the initial field report without looking up from the supply cart. Navy, covert extraction gone wrong, according to whoever relayed the call. Multiple trauma, internal bleeding suspected, head injury confirmed, vitals unstable during transport. Name? Cole, Marcus, 28, SEAL. She registered the name and the designation with the professional neutrality she had learned to apply to all incoming information, absorbing it, filing it, not reacting to it until reaction was useful. The fact of his being a SEAL was clinically relevant insofar as it described a body that had been conditioned to an exceptional degree, which affected how certain injuries presented and how certain interventions needed to be calibrated. Beyond that, she treated it the way she treated everything else, as information in service of care. Where's the team? She asked. Not the medical team. She could see the medical team. Danny looked up. What team? SEALs don't deploy alone, she said. He had teammates. Where are they? Danny looked at Sandoval, who had just gotten off his phone call. Sandoval looked at Olivia with the slight pause of a man who had been caught not asking the right question. Waiting room, Sandoval said. I think someone should be with them, she said. Olivia, we've got... I know what we've got, she said. I'll be in the bay in 3 minutes. She turned and walked toward the waiting room. There were 2 of them. She had expected more, or rather, she hadn't expected what she found, which was 2 men in civilian clothes sitting in the waiting area chairs with a particular stillness of people who had been in enough waiting rooms to know that movement didn't help and patience was the only available instrument. They were both young, mid-20s maybe, and she could tell from the way they were sitting, the angle of their spines and the positioning of their hands, and the specific quality of their alertness, that civilian clothes were a costume and not a natural state. The taller one looked up when she came in. His eyes were the eyes of someone who had been awake for a long time and intended to remain so. Are you here for Marcus Cole? She asked. Yes, ma'am, the taller one said, and the automatic respect in the address, not performative, just the default register of a certain kind of training, landed with a specific weight. I'm Olivia Hayes, charge nurse, He's coming in now. She looked at both of them. He's critical. The team is prepared and we will do everything possible. I need you to stay here for now, and I need you to tell me if there's anything in his medical history that isn't in the field report. Nothing, the taller one said. He's healthy, was healthy. He stopped, and she watched him adjust the tense with the controlled precision of a man who had decided not to use the past tense before it was warranted. Was and is, she said. Until the attending tells you otherwise, present tense applies in this department. What are your names? Torres, said the taller one. Luis Torres. Hendricks, said the other. James Hendricks. Mr. Torres, Mr. Hendricks. She held their eyes for a moment. Not long, but deliberate. The specific quality of eye contact that said, I see you. I understand what you're carrying, and I'm going to work now. I'll come back when I have information. That's my word. Torres looked at her for one beat. Thank you, ma'am. She went back to the trauma bay. The helicopter set down at 1:17 in the morning. She heard it from inside. Not the blades exactly, but the change in air pressure and the specific shift in the hospital's ambient sound that preceded every helicopter arrival. The building bracing itself the way a body braces before impact. Then the doors, and the gurney, and the paramedics who had been keeping Marcus Cole alive at altitude for however many minutes the extraction and transport had required, and who transferred him to the trauma team with the controlled efficiency of people handing off a critical relay. She got her first look at him. He was young. She knew that from the chart, 28, but knowing a number and seeing a face were different things. And the face was young in a way that had nothing to do with the injuries, which were severe, invisible, and consistent with what the field report had described. He was tall, built in the specific way that SEAL training built people, the kind of conditioning that was about function rather than appearance. And underneath the injuries in the field dressings and the pallor of blood loss, she could see the architecture of a person who had been, until very recently, extraordinarily healthy. The head injury was the most concerning. The internal bleeding was more immediately dangerous but more manageable. She could see from the imaging that had been sent ahead that the surgical team was already reviewing it. The head injury was the unknown. The head injury was the one that didn't announce itself cleanly. BP, she called. 82/50, Priya said. Low. Not catastrophically low, but low in the way that said the next 20 minutes would determine several things. Get Dr. Kim on the line, she said to Danny. He needs to know about the head presentation before we go to the OR. Already called, Danny said, and she registered that Danny was, actually, quite good, and that she had been correct about the 3 years. She worked. There was a particular quality to trauma work at 1 in the morning that was distinct from the same work at noon or 4 in the afternoon. It wasn't that the stakes were higher or lower. The stakes were identical. It was the context in which the stakes existed. During the day, the hospital was a busy environment with ambient noise and visible population and the constant low-level social performance of people who were being observed by other people. At 1 in the morning, the world outside the hospital had gone mostly quiet, and inside the trauma bay, there was only the work and the people doing it, and the person the work was being done for. Olivia had always found this clarifying. She coordinated the prep for surgical transfer, managed the monitoring lines, communicated with Dr. Kim, who arrived in 7 minutes in the rumpled clothing of a man who had been asleep and had chosen not to take time to fix that. She answered questions and anticipated needs and talked Marcus Cole through the interventions in the low, continuous voice she used for unconscious patients. Not because anyone had proven they could hear it, but because no one had proven they couldn't, and she had decided years ago that the possibility was sufficient reason to continue. You're at Bethesda, she said quietly, her hand briefly on his forearm as she checked the IV site. You're safe. Your team is here. We're taking care of you. She didn't know if he heard it. She said it anyway. At 2:43, he went to the OR. She watched the surgical team take him through the double doors and felt the particular shift that always followed. The specific transition from active intervention to waiting, from the doing to the hoping, from the things you could control to the things you had already done everything you could about. She went back to the waiting room. Torres and Hendricks had been joined by a third man, older, late 30s, with the bearing of someone senior to the other two, who stood when she came through the door with the automatic posture of a man responding to an authority he recognized even in civilian context. "Surgery," she said. "He's in surgery. The team is strong. He is holding." Torres exhaled. One short, controlled breath. The exhale of a man who had been holding it for 2 hours. "What's the head injury?" the third man asked. His voice was measured, and she revised her estimate of his age upward. Early 40s, possibly. The voice of someone who had been receiving bad news in high-stakes contexts for long enough to have developed a specific relationship with it. "Still being assessed," she said. "I won't give you information I don't have. What I can tell you is that the surgical team is addressing the internal bleeding, which is the most immediately life-threatening concern, and that the neurological picture will be clearer once he's stable." She looked at him directly. "You're the senior man?" "Chief Martinez," he said. "Ricardo Martinez." A pause. "He's our guy." The simplicity of that, "he's our guy," landed in the room with a weight that she registered somewhere that wasn't clinical. She had heard it before, in various forms, from various families and teams, and groups of people who gathered in waiting rooms around the people they could not afford to lose. She had never stopped feeling it land. "I know," she said. "I'll be back when I have more." She turned to go. "Ma'am." Martinez's voice stopped her. She turned. "Whatever you're doing for him," he said. "Thank you." She looked at the three of them, Torres, Hendricks, Martinez, sitting with the particular settled patience of men who understood that this was the part they couldn't affect and had decided to be present for it anyway, the way soldiers were present for things they couldn't control, because presence was the only form of loyalty available. "That's my job," she said. She meant it. She also meant everything underneath it that the job contained. The 12 years and the nights, and the names she had learned, and the hands she had held, and the voice she had used for people who might or might not be able to hear her. All of it compressed into 4 words. She went back to the nursing station. Dolores Kowalski was awake in bed 3 when she passed. It was nearly 4 in the morning, and Dolores didn't sleep well regardless of the hour. "Helicopter?" Dolores asked. "Helicopter," Olivia confirmed. "Young?" "Yes." Dolores was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You'll take care of him." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Olivia said. She sat down at the nurse's station and opened Marcus Cole's chart and began documenting the night's events with the steady precision that 12 years had made automatic. Her hands moved through the familiar sequence without requiring her full conscious attention, which left a part of her mind free to do what it always did in the quiet hours after a critical admission. Review, assess, identify anything that had been missed, anything that could still be improved, anything that needed attention before morning. She worked through the documentation, and she thought about the way Torres had said, "Ma'am," the way Martinez had said, "He's our guy," the specific weight of those 3 words in a waiting room at 2 in the morning, and what it meant to be the person standing between the people who said them and the thing they were afraid of losing. She had never thought of herself as part of something larger than the work, but sitting at the nurse's station at 4 in the morning on her last shift, with Marcus Cole in an OR somewhere above her, and 3 men in a waiting room who had nowhere else to be, she felt it for the first time. The outline of something she hadn't had a name for in 12 years of doing this. She didn't try to name it yet. She finished the chart. She got up to make the rounds she had been making, without fail, since 11 o'clock. She passed bed 3. "Still here?" Dolores said. "Still here," Olivia said. "Good," said Dolores. "That's where you're supposed to be." Orchestrated, seamless, narrative continuation. "Với đầy đủ yêu cầu kỹ thuật." Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation với đầy đủ yêu cầu kỹ thuật. Marcus Cole came out of surgery at 5:48 in the morning. Olivia knew the moment the OR doors opened because she had been tracking the time with the specific peripheral attention she reserved for cases that had taken up residence in the part of her mind that didn't clock out. She was at the nurse's station updating a chart when Dr. Kim came through the corridor with his surgical cap still on and his expression carrying the particular quality of a man who had done something difficult and was still deciding how to feel about the outcome. She stood. "He's out," Kim said, stopping at the station. "Bleeding is controlled. The spleen was the primary source. We removed it. 2 secondary sites, both addressed." He paused. "The head injury is our remaining concern. No active bleed on the CT we ran mid-surgery, but the swelling is significant. We're putting him in the ICU and we're watching." He looked at her with the eyes of a surgeon who had been doing this long enough to know the difference between the cases he could promise and the cases he could only work. "The next 72 hours will tell us more than I can tell you right now." "Neurological prognosis?" she asked. "Unknown," he said, "genuinely unknown. The mechanism of injury was significant, and the swelling is in an area that concerns me. But," he stopped, "he's 28, and he's built like a person whose body is extremely interested in survival. I've learned to respect that." "I'll update the family," she said. He glanced toward the waiting room. "They're not family." "They're what he has here tonight," she said. Kim looked at her for a moment, then he nodded. "Update them." She walked to the waiting room. All 3 of them were still there. Martinez was standing. He'd been standing, she suspected, for most of the last 3 hours. The kind of man whose body defaulted to readiness as a resting state. Torres was seated but upright, forearms on knees, in the posture of someone who had been very still for a very long time by an act of will. Hendricks had his eyes closed, but she could tell from the quality of his stillness that he was not asleep. All 3 of them looked at her the moment she came through the door. She had delivered this kind of update, the intermediate kind, the one that was neither good nor bad, but was suspended in the uncertain space between them, more times than she could count. She had learned that the most important thing was precision. People in waiting rooms didn't need comfort as much as they needed information they could trust, delivered by someone who took them seriously enough to be honest. "He's out of surgery," she said. "The surgical team controlled the internal bleeding. His vitals are stable. He's being transferred to the ICU." The exhale that moved through all 3 of them simultaneously was one of the more physically palpable things she had witnessed in a waiting room. "The head injury," Martinez said, "not a question, a prompt, because he was the kind of man who identified the uncovered information and asked for it directly." "Still being monitored," she said. "The imaging doesn't show active bleeding, which is the best possible outcome at this stage. The swelling is being managed. The next 72 hours are critical." She held his eyes. "I won't minimize it. It's real. But he made it through a surgery that was significant, and he is stable, and that matters." Torres made a sound that was not quite a word. He pressed the back of his hand briefly to his mouth and looked at the ceiling for 2 seconds. The specific gesture of a man allowing himself a controlled moment of something before reassembling. And then he looked back at her. "Can we see him?" Torres asked. "He's in transfer to the ICU right now," she said. "Give me 30 minutes. "Ma'am," Hendricks said, speaking for what she realized was the first time since she'd met him. His voice was quieter than the others, younger sounding. "He's going to be okay?" She looked at him. He was 24, maybe 25, with the face of someone who was very good at appearing older than he was, until a moment like this one, when the training temporarily ran out and what was left was a young man who was frightened for his friend. "I'm going to do everything I can," she said. "That's the most honest answer I have." He nodded, the nod of a person accepting something they didn't want to accept, because accepting it was the only available option. She went back to the nursing station. She sat down. She looked at the clock, 6:02, and processed the fact that her shift ended at 7, and Marcus Cole's 72-hour critical window was just beginning, and she was leaving today. This was her last shift. She sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the ICU charge nurse. At 6:31, she walked the 3 SEALs to the ICU herself. This was outside her jurisdiction. She was an ER nurse, and the ICU was its own universe with its own rules and its own staff. And technically, her authority to escort anyone had ended when the OR doors closed. She knew this. She also knew that nobody was going to stop her, because 12 years at the same institution meant that she knew every corridor and every face and every unwritten protocol. And the unwritten protocol tonight was that these 3 men had been in a waiting room since before 2 in the morning, and she was not going to hand them off to a stranger at the ICU entrance like a package changing delivery services. She walked them in herself. Marcus Cole looked smaller in the ICU bed than he had in the trauma bay. That was always the way. The crisis phase had a specific intensity that made everything in it feel larger than its actual scale. And the aftermath had a specific quiet that reversed the effect. He was intubated, heavily monitored, with a particular stillness of unconsciousness that Olivia had learned to read. Not peaceful exactly, but not struggling either. The body doing the serious interior work of survival, with every available resource directed inward. Martinez stopped at the foot of the bed. Torres went to the left side and stood there, with his hand hovering an inch above Marcus's arm, not touching, as though touch might disturb something fragile. Hendricks stood at the door for a moment before coming in. She watched his face and saw him find the thing he was looking for. Some confirmation that the person in the bed was the person he had come to find, continuous with the person he knew, still present. She gave them the space. She stood near the door and she let them have the room, their particular private grief and relief, and the specific prayers of people who didn't typically use the word prayer, but who were doing the thing prayer was for. She didn't speak. She didn't prompt. She had learned that some moments required a nurse to be a wall rather than a presence, something that held the space rather than occupied it. After 4 minutes, Martinez turned to her. "Does he know we're here?" he asked. She looked at Marcus Cole's face. "Probably not consciously," she said, "but I've been talking to my patients during the unconscious phases for 12 years, and I've had enough of them wake up and tell me they heard things that the science says they couldn't have heard." She paused. "My honest answer is, I don't know. So I behave as though they can." Martinez looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't fully name. It wasn't the clinical assessment of information received. It was something more personal, more interior. "Talk to him," he said, not a request, almost an instruction. The voice of a man who had identified the right resource and was directing it. She nodded. She moved to the bedside and she put her hand lightly on Marcus Cole's forearm, and she said, in the quiet, steady voice that was hers specifically, the one she had developed over years and countless bedsides, "Marcus, it's Nurse Hayes. You made it through surgery. Your team is here. Torres and Hendricks and Martinez. They're right here in this room. You're at Bethesda. You're safe." She felt Torres go very still beside her. "The mission was a success," Martinez said quietly from the other side. "You hear me, Marcus? Mission was a success. You come back when you're ready." The monitors continued their steady reporting. Nothing changed that the equipment could measure. But Olivia had been doing this for 12 years, and she had learned to read the things the equipment didn't measure. And she thought, she could not prove it, she would not have said it out loud, that something in the quality of Marcus Cole's breathing changed very slightly in the 2 seconds after Martinez spoke, as though something that had been held released by the smallest fraction. She looked at Martinez. He was looking at Marcus with the expression of a man who had just done the last thing available to him and was now fully in the territory of waiting. "He heard you," she said. She didn't know if it was true. She said it because it was what she believed, and because belief was sometimes the only thing left to offer. At 6:55, 5 minutes before the end of her shift, she went to the locker room and sat on the bench and held her own hands in her lap and did the things she rarely allowed herself to do at work. She felt it. Not the analyzed version, not the professionally processed version, but the actual feeling of the morning, unmediated. 12 years, thousands of patients. And tonight had been this specific admission, this specific young man in the ICU, these specific 3 men in the waiting room. This had been something she didn't have a clinical category for. She thought about her brother, Daniel, 34, who had served in the Navy for 6 years and come home and become an accountant and called her every Sunday and made her laugh more than anyone else she knew. She thought about what it would mean to be Torres or Hendricks or Martinez. She thought about what it would mean to sit in a waiting room while the person you had gone into something with was somewhere else, beyond your reach, and the only thing between them and the worst possible outcome was a nurse you'd met 40 minutes ago who had promised to come back with information. She thought about the fact that she had kept that promise, the way she had kept every promise she had made in this building for 12 years. Not because she was extraordinary, she had never thought of herself as extraordinary, because she had decided, early and quietly, and without making a speech about it, that promises were the unit of trust that medicine ran on, and trust was the thing patients couldn't survive without, and therefore promises were not optional. She stood up. She went back to the floor. Danny was at the nurse's station, preparing the morning handoff. He looked up when she came in with the expression of a person who had been tracking the night and understood its weight. "How is he?" Danny asked. "Stable," she said. "Critical but stable. ICU is watching." "And the team?" She thought about the 3 men she had walked to the ICU. "They're where they need to be," she said. Danny nodded. He looked at the clock. 2 minutes, he said. "Then it's officially your last day." "It is," she said. "How does it feel?" She looked at the nursing station, the familiar clutter of it, the charts and the monitors and the coffee cups, and the specific institutional smell of a place she had spent more waking hours in than her own home. She looked at the corridor that led to the ICU where Marcus Cole was fighting the quiet interior battle that nobody could fight for him. She looked at the clock. "Ask me at the end of the day," she said. He laughed. "You said that already." "Still the right answer," she said. The morning shift nurse, Patricia, who had been at Bethesda for 9 years and had the specific competence of someone who would never be flashy and never need to be, arrived at 7:02, and Olivia gave the handoff with a thoroughness she gave every handoff, the kind that left nothing to inference or assumption. Every patient, every chart, every pending order, every family member in the waiting room. When she got to Marcus Cole, she paused. "SEAL," she said. "ICU, post-op, head injury still being assessed. 3 teammates are with him. They may ask to speak to whoever is managing his care." She paused. "Answer their questions. All of them. They've been in that waiting room since 2 in the morning, and they deserve information delivered by someone who takes them seriously." Patricia looked at her. "You know them?" "I know them well enough," Olivia said. She finished the handoff. She signed out. She went back to the locker room and got her coat and her bag, and she stood for a moment at the locker she had used for 12 years with her hand on the door of it. And she thought about every morning she had stood in this specific spot at the end of a shift. The exhausted mornings and the satisfying mornings, and the mornings she had needed 10 minutes before she could make herself drive home. And this morning, which was none of those things and all of them simultaneously. She closed the locker. She walked toward the exit. She passed the ICU on the way to the parking garage. She always parked in the structure on the east side, which meant the ICU corridor was the direct route. She had done this deliberately when she chose the parking structure 3 years ago. She had told herself it was for efficiency. She had known it was so that she would pass the ICU twice every shift, arriving and leaving, because there was something in the passing that was a form of attention, a form of acknowledgement that the people in those beds existed and mattered even when your shift was technically somewhere else. She passed it now. Through the window in the ICU door, she could see, at the far end of the corridor, the outside of Marcus Cole's room. Martinez was sitting in the chair beside the door, not inside, outside, in the corridor, in the chair that was there for family members who needed to be close, but needed to be able to breathe. He was sitting with his forearms on his knees and his head slightly bowed, and he was not sleeping, and he was not on his phone. He was just present, just there. She almost kept walking. She stopped. She went through the ICU door and walked to where he was sitting. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, the alert, evaluating look of a man whose resting state was readiness, and then something shifted in his face when he recognized her. "You're still here," he said. "I'm leaving," she said. She paused. "I wanted to say that the day shift is strong. Patricia is his nurse today. She's very good. She has everything." Martinez nodded slowly. "You briefed her?" "Thoroughly," she said. He looked at her for a moment, not the clinical assessment she had received from him earlier. Something different. The look of a man who was seeing a person rather than a role, who had updated his understanding and was acknowledging the update. "This was your last shift," he said. She looked at him. "Yes. You stayed through all of it." "That's what last shifts are," she said. He looked at the ICU door. Through the window, the monitors continued their steady reporting, and somewhere behind them, Marcus Cole was doing the slow interior work of coming back from the edge. "He's going to make it," Martinez said. Not a question, not even exactly a statement. More like a decision he had made, the kind of decision that had nothing to do with probability and everything to do with refusal to accept the alternative. She thought about everything she knew about the next 72 hours, and everything she didn't know, and the honest clinical picture and the unknowns in it. "Yes," she said, because some things required certainty before they had earned it. Because sometimes a nurse's job was to give a man the answer he needed to hear so that he could do the thing he needed to do, which was sit in a corridor chair and be present for a teammate who needed the proximity even through a closed door. Martinez looked at her. "Thank you, Nurse Hayes." "Olivia," she said, a pause. "Thank you, Olivia." She held his eyes for a moment, just a moment, the length of an acknowledgement between two people who understood, from different directions, what it meant to do a hard thing quietly and without fanfare. Then she walked out of the ICU, through the corridor, and out of the hospital into the early morning light of a day that was her first official day of the rest of her life. She drove home. She did not cry until she pulled into her driveway, and even then it was brief. The compressed, specific release of 12 years finding its exit in the private space of a car, in a driveway, with nobody watching. The way emotions waited patiently for the appropriate moment, and then arrived without ceremony. She sat there for 3 minutes. Then she went inside and made coffee and called her brother. "How was the last shift?" Daniel asked. She thought about Marcus Cole. She thought about Torres's hand hovering over his arm without touching. She thought about Martinez saying, "He's our guy," in a waiting room at 2 in the morning. She thought about Hendrix's face when he asked, "He's going to be okay?" She thought about the specific quality of the voice she had used at Marcus Cole's bedside, and the feeling she'd had that something had shifted in his breathing. "It was a good one," she said. "Really?" Orchestrated, emotionally driven narrative continuation with strategic pacing and dramatic tension. Orchestrated, emotionally driven narrative continuation with strategic pacing and dramatic tension. She slept for 6 hours. That was not normal for her. After night shifts, she typically slept 9, sometimes 10, the deep recovery sleep of a body that had been running on emergency reserves and needed the debt paid. But she woke at 2 in the afternoon with the specific alertness of someone whose mind had been continuing to work through the sleeping hours, and had reached a point where it needed to report back. She lay in bed for a moment and thought about Marcus Cole. She thought about the 72-hour window Kim had described. She thought about the swelling, which was the variable that didn't resolve neatly, the one that required time and monitoring and the particular patience of medicine practiced at the edge of what it could control. She thought about Martinez in the corridor chair. She thought about Hendrix's face. She got up and made coffee and called Patricia. She had done this before, called in on cases that had stayed with her after shift changes. Patricia knew this about her, had worked alongside her long enough to receive these calls with the practical warmth of someone who understood that Olivia's version of leaving work at work had always been approximate rather than absolute. "He's stable," Patricia said, without requiring an explanation for why she was calling. "Vitals are holding. The neurologist came in this morning. He's cautiously optimistic about the swelling, says the trajectory is in the right direction. Still unconscious, still on the vent, but the numbers look better than they did at 7. Olivia exhaled. "His team is there?" she asked. "2 of them. They've been trading off in shifts. 1 stays, 2 go, then they rotate. The tall one, Torres, he's been talking to him." "Good," she said. "The day attending updated them this morning," Patricia said. "They took it well, professional. The older one, Martinez, he asked very specific questions. Good questions. The kind that tell you the person has been thinking it through." Olivia thought about Martinez in the corridor chair in the early morning, head slightly bowed, not sleeping. Thinking it through was exactly what he'd been doing. "Thank you, Patricia," she said. "You're retired," Patricia said, not unkindly. "You don't have to call." "I know," Olivia said. Patricia made a sound that was warm and not surprised. "I'll call you if anything changes." Olivia set her phone on the counter. She stood at her kitchen window with her coffee and looked at the ordinary Tuesday afternoon outside. A neighbor walking a dog, a UPS truck making a stop, a child on a bicycle, and felt the strangeness of being on the outside of a hospital for the first time in 12 years. Not the building itself, the rhythm of it, the specific pulse of a place that never stopped, continuing without her in it. She had known this would happen. She had been preparing for it. It was still strange. On Wednesday morning, 30 hours after she had left Bethesda, her phone rang. Unknown number, but with the prefix she associated with the hospital's administrative lines. She answered with the alertness of a person whose body had not yet learned that certain calls were no longer her responsibility. "Is this Olivia Hayes?" The voice was male, formal in the specific way of someone accustomed to formal registers, with the particular cadence of a person who made calls of this nature on a regular basis. "It is," she said. "Ms. Hayes, this is Commander Bradley, Naval Special Warfare Command. I'm calling regarding the care provided to Petty Officer First Class Marcus Cole at Bethesda Military Medical Center on Monday night." A pause. "I wanted to speak with you personally." She sat down, not because she needed to, because the moment seemed to call for it, the way certain moments required you to take up less space in order to fully receive them. "Commander," she said. "I've been briefed on the events of Monday night," he said. "The medical team's performance was exceptional across the board. But Chief Martinez spoke with me specifically about the care you provided. Not just the clinical care, though he described that in considerable detail, but the way you handled his team." Another pause. "He said you made sure they had information, that you treated them like people who deserved honesty, that you walked them to the ICU yourself." She didn't say anything for a moment. She was processing the specific weight of being seen, not for the extraordinary thing, not for the night she'd navigated a critical trauma admission on the last shift of her career, but for the small things. The things that weren't in the protocol. The things that were just how she did the job. "That's what I would do for any family in a waiting room," she said. "With respect," Commander Bradley said, "it isn't always what happens, and it mattered. It mattered considerably to men who needed to know that someone was taking their teammates seriously." His voice had the measured quality of a man choosing his words precisely, which told her these were the words he had decided to use and not the words he had defaulted to. I called to thank you, personally, on behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command. She was quiet for a moment. How is he? She asked. A pause. Then, with something in it that was very close to warmth. He's fighting. The neurologist is encouraged. They extubated him this morning. She closed her eyes for 1 second. That's very good news. It is, he said. The team is with him. Martinez hasn't left the hospital since Monday. A brief pause. I'm told that's partially your doing as well, that you told him to stay. I told him Marcus could hear them, she said. I don't know if that's true. I believe it. Commander Bradley was quiet for a moment, in a way that said he was sitting with what she just said, not moving past it quickly. Ms. Hayes, I understand this was your final shift. Yes. 12 years at Bethesda. Yes. That's a long service, he said. A long service in a specific kind of work that doesn't get acknowledged the way other kinds of service do. He stopped. I want you to know that the Navy is aware of the work that people like you do, and that we are grateful for it. She was a person who had never needed external recognition. She had understood early that if you needed acknowledgement to sustain you, the work would eventually use you up, because acknowledgement was intermittent and the work was constant. She had learned to sustain herself on the work itself, on the names she remembered, in the hands she held, in the voice she used at bedsides in the deep of the night. But this call from this man about this specific night, she felt it land somewhere real. Thank you, Commander, she said. After the call ended, she sat at her kitchen table for a long time with her phone face down in front of her and her hands folded on the table, and she thought about all of it. The call, the night, the 12 years, the thing Dolores had said, that's where you're supposed to be. She thought about where she was supposed to be now. She didn't have an answer, but the question felt different than it had 24 hours ago. Less like a void and more like a page that was blank because it hadn't been written yet, which was a different thing entirely. She went back to Bethesda on Thursday. Not on shift. She had no shift. She was retired. She had no clinical authority or professional reason to be there. She went because Patricia had called Wednesday evening to say that Marcus Cole had been extubated and was showing increased responsiveness and was asking, in the fragmented, effortful way of someone still mostly submerged, for the night nurse. The one from the first night. The one who talked. Patricia had relayed this with the specific neutrality of someone delivering a message they understood was significant without editorializing about it. Olivia had said she'd come in the morning. She wore street clothes. That was its own specific strangeness, walking through the doors of Bethesda in jeans and a jacket instead of scrubs, with no badge, no protocol, no role to move into. Just a person visiting a patient. The ICU charge nurse on the day shift was a woman named Carol, who had been at Bethesda for 15 years and who greeted Olivia with the specific warmth of one long-service person recognizing another. Room 4, Carol said. He's been in and out all morning, better in the last 2 hours. His team? Torres is in there. Martinez went to get food. First food he's eaten since Tuesday morning, so I told him I'd watch for 10 minutes, and if he wasn't back, I'd have someone find him. She paused. That man does not leave. Olivia smiled. No, she said, he doesn't. She went to room 4. Torres was in the chair beside the bed with his forearms on his knees. The same posture from the waiting room. The specific posture of a man who had been holding vigil and had become so accustomed to it that it had settled into his body. He looked up when she came in and something happened in his face that she had to look at twice to name. Relief. Uncomplicated, direct. The relief of a person who had been waiting for a specific thing and was now watching it arrive. You came, he said. I said I would, she told him. He stood, which was instinctive and respectful, and told her things about his training without requiring explanation. He's been asking for you, Torres said. Well, not asking, more like he keeps saying the voice. From the first night, the one that talked to him. She looked at the bed. Marcus Cole was not the still, absent figure from the ICU on Tuesday morning. He was the same injuries, the same monitoring, the same bed, but he was present in it now, in the specific way consciousness made a person present, the quality of occupancy that had been absent before. His eyes were closed, but his face was different, inhabited, active in a way she recognized as the territory just before and after waking. She moved to the bedside. "Marcus," she said in the voice, the quiet, specific voice that had developed over 12 years of bedsides and that she hadn't realized, until this moment, was something she carried in her, not something she put on. "It's Olivia Hayes, the nurse from the first night. I'm here." His eyes opened, not fully, the specific, effortful, partial opening of someone for whom consciousness was still a new arrival and required work. But they opened, and they found her, and she watched recognition happen in them the way she had watched it happen in dozens of patients over 12 years. The moment the interior connected to the exterior, the moment a person's eyes became windows again rather than surfaces. His mouth moved. "You," he said. The voice was barely there, rough, effortful, the voice of a man for whom the word represented a significant expenditure, but it was there. "Me," she said. His hand moved on the bed, not reaching, just moving, the purposeful motion of someone whose body was reinventing its ability to communicate. His fingers found the edge of the blanket and held it. "I heard you," he said. She looked at him. "What did you hear?" "Weather," he said, slow, each word its own effort. "You talked about the weather." A pause. "Tuesday. What was the weather Tuesday?" She thought back. "Cold," she said. "Clear. No wind." Something that was the beginning of an expression crossed his face. Not a smile. Not yet. His face was not ready for that, but the precursor to one. The specific softening that arrived before the muscles were ready. "Cold," he repeated, as though confirming a memory against the original. "Yeah." Torres from the chair made a sound that he immediately controlled. She did not look at him because looking at him in that moment would have disrupted something, and she had learned over 12 years precisely which moments required an observer to become a wall. "The mission," Marcus said, "was a success," she said. "Martinez told you on Tuesday. He was right here in this room." His eyes moved to the chair where Torres was sitting. Torres leaned forward. "Right here, Marcus," Torres said. His voice was steady in the way that required effort to be steady. "Every day." Marcus's eyes stayed on Torres for a long moment. Then they came back to Olivia. "You stayed," he said. "I talked to you until you went to surgery," she said, "and I came back when you were ready." He was quiet for a moment, doing the interior work of a man assembling the fragments of the last 3 days into something coherent. She watched him do it and did not rush it and did not fill the silence, because this was the kind of silence that needed to be inhabited, not covered. "Why?" he asked. She understood the question, not why she had talked to him or why she had come back. He understood those things. He was asking the deeper version, the one underneath. Why did it matter to you? The specific question that arose when a person in a hospital bed confronted the reality of someone caring for them with a degree of investment that exceeded what was technically required. She thought about how to answer it honestly. "Because you're a person," she said, "not a case, and because the people who were waiting for you in that waiting room at 2 a.m. deserved to believe that whoever was between them and the worst possible outcome was treating you like a person." She paused. "And because it was my last shift, and I wanted it to be a good one." He looked at her. His eyes, dark brown, she noticed now in a way she hadn't been able to fully register on Tuesday night, were clearer than they had been at the beginning of this conversation, the fog of trauma receding by increments. "Last shift," he said. "I retired Monday night." His expression moved. You stayed through the whole, that's what last shifts are, she said, and she heard in her own voice the echo of what she had said to Martinez in the ICU corridor. And she thought that it was becoming true in a way it hadn't fully been when she first said it. Martinez arrived 8 minutes later with 2 cups of coffee and the particular energy of a man who had allowed himself a brief interruption and was already calculating how long he had been away. He stopped when he saw Olivia. "You came," he said. "He asked for me," she said. Martinez looked at Marcus in the bed. Something moved through his face that was private and not for her. The specific expression of a man looking at a person who had come back from somewhere difficult and feeling the weight of that relief in a way that 12 years of training had not made entirely manageable. He came to the bedside and stood on the other side from Olivia and said, "Hey." "Hey," Marcus said. His voice was stronger than it had been 15 minutes ago. She had seen this before. The specific momentum of recovery, the way engagement accelerated it, the way being heard called more of a person back. "You look terrible," Martinez said. "Feel terrible," Marcus said. "Good, means you're paying attention." Something in Marcus's face completed the movement she had seen begin earlier. It became fully a smile, small and effortful and genuine. The smile of a man who was exactly where his people were and knew it. She stepped back from the bedside, not because she was finished, because this moment belonged to them, and her role in it had shifted from essential to present. And present was the right role for this particular beat. Torres stood and came to the bedside too, and the 3 of them occupied the space around the bed with the specific ease of people for whom proximity was a natural language. And she stood near the door and watched the thing she had been working toward since 1:17 on Monday morning. Watched it exist, complete, the room full of people who were all where they were supposed to be. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from Daniel. "How's the retirement going?" She looked at Marcus Cole in the bed, talking to his teammates in the slow, effortful voice of someone who was coming back and knew it and was letting himself know it. She looked at Martinez, who had not eaten properly in 3 days and had just arrived with 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, because he was constitutionally incapable of going anywhere without accounting for the person he was going to find there. She looked at Torres, who had talked to an unconscious man every day for 3 days because someone had told him it might help, and he had decided that possibility was sufficient reason. She typed back, "Better than expected." She meant it more completely than Daniel would understand from the text alone, but that was all right. Some things required the whole story to explain, and she had time now. She had, for the first time in 12 years, a great deal of time. She put her phone in her pocket. She looked at Carol through the ICU window. Carol, who had tracked the whole thing from the charge desk, with the attention of someone who understood that what was happening in room 4 was not an ordinary recovery visit, who gave Olivia a single nod that communicated more than a conversation would have. She nodded back. She looked at the room one more time. Marcus, Martinez, Torres, the monitors steady, the morning light doing whatever it was doing outside the window she was not describing. Everything in its place. Then she walked out of the ICU and through the corridor and out the east exit and into the parking structure. And she sat in her car for a moment with both hands on the wheel and felt the specific quality of the morning. Not the grief of ending and not the lightness of beginning, but something she thought might be the feeling of things being exactly as they should be, which was rarer than either of those things, and worth sitting inside for a moment before it changed. Her phone buzzed again. "That's not an answer," she smiled. "No, it isn't," she typed back. "Tell you Sunday." She started the car and drove home through the Thursday morning that was hers now, entirely, to do with as she decided. Thursday became Friday the way hospital weeks always moved, not in clean, discrete days, but in the accumulated sequence of status updates and small progressions, and the particular rhythm of a body working its way back from the edge. Olivia knew this because Patricia called on Thursday evening to say that Marcus had eaten something. Not much, a few spoonfuls of broth, the beginning of the beginning, but the eating of it had apparently been accompanied by a complaint about the temperature, which Patricia relayed with the specific satisfaction of a nurse who recognized a patient complaining about food as a reliable indicator of recovery. "He's getting his personality back," Patricia said. "That's the best sign there is," Olivia said. She had been spending her first days of retirement doing the things she had told herself she would do. Unpacking the boxes from her office that had been sitting in her spare room for 3 weeks, taking walks in the morning at a pace that was not determined by shift changes, calling her mother. She was doing all of these things and doing them genuinely, not as performance of retirement, but as the actual practice of a different life. And she was also thinking about Marcus Cole with a regularity that she recognized as the specific attachment that certain cases created. Not inappropriate, not unprofessional, just the honest reality of a nurse who had been present at the beginning of something and was invested in seeing how it resolved. She told herself the resolution was Thursday's broth complaint. She was not entirely correct. Friday arrived with a specific quality she hadn't anticipated. Not anxiety, not exactly, but the low-level, heightened awareness of a person who had spent 12 years moving through Fridays with institutional purpose and was now encountering one without it. She made coffee. She called her mother. She started reading the book that had been sitting on her nightstand for 4 months. At 11:15, her phone rang. Patricia. "He wants to talk to you," Patricia said. No preamble, no build-up. "Properly. He's been asking since this morning. He's off the vent. He's sitting up. The neurologist cleared him for normal cognitive function, Olivia. The swelling resolved. He's going to be fine." She sat down. "The neurologist cleared him," she repeated. "Full cognitive function. Mild deficits expected in the short term. Nothing that isn't consistent with complete recovery." Patricia's voice had the warmth of someone delivering news they were personally invested in. "He's fine. He's going to be completely fine." She pressed her hand flat on her kitchen table, the way she had pressed hands flat on tables and counters and bed rails throughout 12 years of receiving significant information. The physical grounding that her body had learned to seek when something large needed to be received carefully. "Tell him I'll call," she said. "He asked if you'd come," Patricia said. "In person. I know you're retired and you don't have to, and I'll come," she said. She was in her car 11 minutes later. He was sitting up when she arrived. That was the first thing, the simple, enormous fact of him sitting up in the bed that he had been lying in unconsciously since Monday night, positioned against the pillows with the careful deliberateness of someone still negotiating with their own body about what it was capable of. He looked like a person who had been through something significant and was on the other side of it. There was still the pallor, still the careful quality of his movements, still the monitoring equipment with its steady reporting, but his eyes were clear and present in the specific way she had last seen them on Thursday morning. And he was looking at her the way a person looked at someone they had been thinking about. Torres was in the chair again. Torres was always in the chair. She was beginning to think the chair had developed a permanent impression of him. And he stood when she came in, the automatic courtesy that she had stopped being surprised by. "He's been rehearsing," Torres said. Marcus looked at Torres. "I have not been rehearsing." "He's been rehearsing," Torres confirmed to Olivia, as though Marcus hadn't spoken. "I've been thinking about what I want to say," Marcus said. "That's different. That's the definition of rehearsing," Torres said. "Can you?" Marcus stopped, looked at the door. Torres received the look with the comprehension of a person who had been receiving nonverbal communication from this specific individual for years. "I'll be right outside," Torres said, and left, and the door closed behind him with the tactful click of someone who understood the assignment. Olivia sat in the chair Torres had vacated, the chair she had come to think of as the vigil chair, the chair that had held Martinez and Torres and Hendricks in rotation for 4 days, wearing their presence into it. Marcus looked at her. She waited. She was good at waiting. I want to start with an apology, he said. She hadn't expected that. For what? For the fact that you were on your last shift when I came in, he said. Martinez told me. He told me you were supposed to be finished, that it was your retirement night, and that you stayed through all of it. He stopped. I'm sorry it cost you that. She looked at him for a moment. It didn't cost me anything, she said. It was a shift I was working. You were a patient who needed care. That's the professional answer, he said. It wasn't combative. It was observational. The specific precision of someone who had been trained to identify the difference between what a person said and what they meant. It's also the true answer, she said, but not the complete one. She folded her hands in her lap. The complete answer is that it was the best shift I've had in years, and I've thought about why that is. He waited the way she had waited, with the genuine attention of someone who wanted the actual answer. When you came in, she said, you were critical, and you were someone's teammate, and there were people in the waiting room at 2 a.m. who had nowhere else to be. And I realized, she stopped, found the words she had been working toward for 4 days. I realized I had been doing this for 12 years, and I knew exactly what it meant to the people in that waiting room, that someone was taking their person seriously. And I had always known it. But that night I felt it differently. The way you sometimes do a thing for years, and then one time you understand why you were doing it all along. He looked at her for a long moment. You talked to me, he said. When I was unconscious, I heard you. I know, she said. No, I mean I really heard you, not fragments. I remember your voice specifically, the quality of it. He paused. My mother used to sit with me when I was sick as a kid. She had this way of talking, not about anything important, just talking, so there was something to follow. A thread. He looked at the window. You sounded like that. She felt it land. Not just the compliment of it, the specific meaning of it, the thing he was telling her about what those hours had been for him. The image of a young man in a difficult place, following a voice back toward the surface. I told you about the weather, she said. Cold, clear, no wind. He recited it with a precision that confirmed the memory was real, not reconstructed. And about a patient named Dolores, who complained about a doctor calling her the patient in 3. And about your brother who was in the Navy. He looked at her directly. You mentioned your brother. She had not remembered mentioning her brother. She had been talking the way she always talked at bedsides, the low, continuous thread, and apparently Daniel had made it in. I did, she said. He served 6 years. He okay? He's an accountant in Chicago, she said. Very okay. Something moved through Marcus's expression. Good, he said, simple and genuine. The specific relief of someone who had reason to care about the welfare of strangers who had served. They talked for 40 minutes, not about the mission. That wasn't hers to ask about, and he wasn't offering it. Not about the medical specifics, which she knew more of than he did, and which weren't the point of this conversation. They talked about the things that happened on the edges of significant events, the peripheral things that turned out to be the center after all. He told her about his mother in San Diego who had flown in Thursday morning and who Martinez had apparently handled with extraordinary competence in a way that made Olivia like Martinez even more than she already did. He told her about the specific experience of being unconscious, not from the inside, because there was no inside, but from the afterward, the way fragments surfaced without chronology or context. It was like static, he said, most of it, and then voices. Your voice was the clearest. Torres talked to you every day, she said. I know, he said. I heard that too, but yours was... He stopped. Yours was calm in a specific way, like you weren't scared. And I think, wherever I was, I needed someone to not be scared. She thought about that. She thought about the years it had taken to develop that quality. Not the absence of fear, which would be dishonest, but the ability to hold fear in one hand and function with the other. The specific discipline of a person who had learned that the patient needed the calm and the calm was hers to provide, regardless of what else was happening inside her. "I'm always scared," she said honestly, "in critical situations, but I've learned to put it somewhere it can wait until later." He looked at her. "That's exactly it," he said. "You can do that. Most people can't." "You can," she said. "I had training." "So did I," she said. "Just different training." He smiled, the full smile this time, not the small, effortful precursor from Thursday, but something more complete, more present. And she thought that it was a very good smile, the smile of someone whose face was built for it, and that Martinez and Torres and Hendricks had been right to sit in that waiting room for 4 days to see it come back. Martinez arrived at 12:30 with his mother's empanadas in a container. He mentioned this detail specifically as context for why he had left the hospital for 3 hours that morning, as though the empanadas were required evidence for his defense. He had apparently been dispatched by his mother, who had heard the story and decided that the nurse who had kept her son's teammate alive needed to be fed. "You didn't have to," Olivia said. "I didn't," he agreed. "My mother did. There's a difference." He set the container on the small table with the air of a man completing a mission. "She said if you don't eat them, she'll be offended. I'm just the messenger." She looked at the container. She looked at Martinez, who was watching her with the specific expression of a man who had a mother who made decisions and was comfortable executing them on her behalf. She opened the container. They were, as it turned out, extraordinary. She ate standing at the small table while Martinez sat in what had become his chair on the other side of the bed. And Marcus watched both of them with the expression of someone deeply satisfied by the domesticity of the scene. And Torres came back in at some point and leaned against the wall and accepted an empanada with the ease of someone accustomed to being fed by Martinez's mother. It was, Olivia thought, the strangest and most comfortable Friday she had spent in years. At one point, the four of them in the room, the easy back and forth of people who had been through something together and were now on the other side of it, Martinez said, "I spoke with Commander Bradley again this morning." The room shifted slightly, not tensely, just attentively. "He's going to be in contact with you directly," Martinez said, looking at Olivia. "There's something being arranged. He asked me not to give you details. I think he wants to tell you himself." She looked at him. "What kind of something?" "The good kind," he said, which told her nothing and everything simultaneously. "Martinez," she said, with the specific patience of a person who had 12 years of practice waiting for attending physicians to stop being vague. "I genuinely cannot say more," he said, and his face had the quality of someone who was enjoying not being able to say more, which was its own kind of information. Marcus, from the bed, had the expression of someone who knew and was also enjoying it, which was two people enjoying something she wasn't part of, which was a different kind of information. "You both know," she said. "I'm recovering from major surgery," Marcus said. "You can't interrogate me." She looked at Torres. "I'm just eating an empanada," Torres said. She looked at the ceiling briefly. Then she looked back at Martinez with the direct, undeflectable gaze that she had developed over years of dealing with people who were trying to manage information she needed. "Is it something I need to prepare for?" she asked. "No," he said, and his voice had shifted from the enjoying the secret register to something more genuine. "It's something you've already earned. It's just the formal version of a thing that's already true." She held his eyes. He held hers. She decided to let it be and finish her empanada. At 2:15, Hendricks arrived with his arm in a sling that had not been there on Tuesday. She had been too focused to notice it in the waiting room, she realized. Or perhaps he had been concealing it, which seemed consistent with his general approach to revealing things about himself. "What happened to your arm?" she asked. "Secondary injury from the extraction," he said, with the specific brevity of someone who considered this a complete answer. And you've been here every day with a secondary injury from the extraction? She said. It's not serious, he said. Has a physician looked at it? Yes, he said. On Tuesday. It's fine. I'm fine. At this hospital? A pause. I was planning to have it looked at more thoroughly. She looked at him. She looked at Martinez. Martinez was looking at the ceiling. James Hendricks, she said, using his full name with the specific cadence that patients recognized as non-negotiable. I am retired, not blind, and I have 12 years of experience identifying people who are treating their own injuries as a lower priority than a teammate's recovery. You will go to the ER today before you leave this building. Hendricks looked at Martinez. Don't look at him, she said. Yes, ma'am, Hendricks said. And the way he said it, ma'am, automatic, the default register of his training, the respect that arrived without calculation, landed in the room with a quality she noticed and filed, and did not examine immediately, because there were 4 people in the room, and Hendricks's arm needed attention. She walked him to the ER herself. Danny was at the nurse's station. He looked up, saw Olivia, looked at Hendricks's arm, looked back at Olivia with the expression of someone encountering a situation that did not require explanation. He needs the arm properly evaluated, she said. He's been ignoring a secondary injury since Tuesday. Olivia, Danny said, you're retired. I'm a visitor, she said. Who is informing you of a patient who needs evaluation? Danny looked at Hendricks. Walk-in? He said. Apparently, Hendricks said. She stayed while Danny got him into triage because she had walked him there, and walking someone partway and leaving seemed inconsistent with the point of walking them there. She sat in the waiting area with the specific experience of being on the other side of the intake process for the first time. Not behind the desk, not in scrubs, just a person in a chair in a waiting room. She looked at the chairs. She thought about Torres and Hendricks sitting in these chairs on Monday night. This specific waiting room, possibly these specific chairs, and what those 2 hours had cost them, and what it had meant to them that she had come out and talked to them directly. She thought about what Martinez had said, the formal version of a thing that's already true. She didn't know what was being arranged. She didn't know what Friday's visit was a prelude to, but she sat in the waiting room chair and looked at the nurse's station, where Danny was working with his characteristic mix of genuine competence and residual impulsivity, and she felt, sitting on this side of the desk, for the first time, in the hospital she had given 12 years to, she felt what it was to be one of the people the work was for. Not the patient, something adjacent. The person who sat in the chair because someone they cared about was on the other side of the wall, and who needed to believe that whoever was between them and the worst possible outcome was treating the situation with the full weight it deserved. She had been that person for thousands of families over 12 years. She had never understood it from the inside. She understood it now, sitting in a waiting room chair, waiting for a young man with an arm injury to be properly evaluated because he had not told anyone about it and someone needed to make sure it got handled. Danny came out 30 minutes later. Fracture, he said, clean, consistent with the mechanism he described. They're putting him in a proper cast. He paused. He told me to tell you he was going to come find you, but they're doing the cast now. I'll wait, she said. Danny looked at her for a moment. You know you could have just called this in. I know, she said, but you walked him over yourself. He needed someone to walk him, she said. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the sincerity of someone who didn't say things like this often enough, I learned a lot from watching you work. I want you to know that. She looked at him. 24 years old, bright and capable, and still in the phase of his career where everything was intensity and forward motion. She thought about Dolores saying, you used to apologize for everything. She thought about the 3 years it had taken to stop doing that. You're going to be very good, she said. You already are. Just remember the names. The names? The patients. All of them. Always. She held his eyes. A name is the first thing a person gives you when they check in. It's the most important thing in their chart. Don't let it get lost behind the room number. He looked at her. Something moved through his face that was the specific expression of information received at the right moment. Okay, he said. I won't. She sat back in the chair. Outside, through the automatic doors, the Friday afternoon was proceeding with its ordinary indifference. People coming in, people going out, the specific pulse of a hospital that never stopped. She sat in the waiting room and she felt, fully, without qualification, that she had spent 12 years becoming exactly the person she was supposed to be, and that the person she was supposed to be had one more thing to do before the story of this particular week closed. She just didn't know yet what it was. Her phone buzzed. Martinez. Commander Bradley called. He's coming tomorrow. Wanted me to let you know. She looked at the text for a moment. She typed back, "Thank you for telling me." She put her phone in her pocket. She waited for Hendricks to come out with his proper cast because she had walked him here and she was going to walk him back. And some things were simply that uncomplicated. Hendricks came out of the ER at 3:40 with a proper cast on his left forearm and the specific expression of a man who had been told by 3 separate medical professionals that he should have come in Tuesday and was processing the collective weight of that consensus. Better? She asked. Heavier, he said, looking at the cast. That's what a properly managed fracture feels like, she said. He looked at her with the particular expression she had come to associate with this specific group of men. The combination of genuine respect and the very slight discomfort of someone not accustomed to being managed by someone who was not in their chain of command. She had noticed it in all 3 of them and had decided it was one of her favorite things about them. She walked him back to the ICU. He thanked her at the door, simply, directly, without the decorative language some people reach for in moments of genuine gratitude. Just thank you, ma'am. The same 2 words she had been receiving from these men since 2 in the morning Monday, and which had not lost their weight with repetition. She drove home. She called Daniel. Commander Bradley is coming tomorrow, she said, without explaining who Commander Bradley was or why his coming should be significant. Daniel, who had 23 seconds of context on Commander Bradley from the brief version of the week she had given him on Thursday's phone call, said, "What does that mean?" "I don't know exactly," she said, "but it's significant." Martinez said it's the formal version of a thing that's already true, she said, which I've been thinking about since he said it. That's military speak for something important, Daniel said. I know, she said. I just don't know what. Are you nervous? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. I think I'm ready. For whatever it is. She paused. Does that make sense? It makes complete sense, Daniel said. It means you know you did the work, and whatever comes next is just the acknowledgement of it. He paused. You always did the work, Olivia. You've been doing the work for 12 years. Someone just finally showed up to say it out loud. She held the phone and thought about her brother, 34 years old, accountant, Sunday calls, the person who made her laugh more than anyone, and who had known her long enough to tell her true things without making them feel like performances. Thank you, Daniel, she said. Sunday, he said. Full story. I want all of it. Sunday, she confirmed. She set her phone on the counter and stood at her kitchen window and looked at the Friday evening settling into the ordinary neighborhood outside, and she felt, quietly, without drama, that she was ready. Saturday arrived with the specific quality of a day that knew it was significant. She wore her navy blazer, not in a performing the occasion way, in the practical way of someone who had decided that certain moments deserved the version of yourself that was pressed and deliberate. She arrived at Bethesda at 10 in the morning, which was the time Martinez had texted her the previous evening with the specific precision of a man who understood logistics. Patricia was at the nurse's station when she came through. He's up, Patricia said. Has been since 7. He's been anticipatory. Anticipatory, Olivia repeated. I don't have a better word, Patricia said. He's sitting up and he keeps watching the door. Martinez told him you were coming, and apparently that information had an effect on his morning. She went to the ICU. All three of them were there. Torres, Hendricks with his new cast, Martinez standing near the window in the specific posture of a man who was waiting for something, and managing the waiting with the military discipline that was simply how he existed in the world. Marcus was sitting up in the bed with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been practicing it and had decided this morning required his best version. He looked better than Friday. Not recovered, recovery was weeks away, but better in the incremental, specific way that each day had been better than the one before. The body making its case for its own survival in the language of improved numbers and clearer eyes, and the particular energy of a person who had arrived somewhere they recognized. You're wearing a blazer, Marcus said. Observant, she said. Is something happening? She looked at Martinez. Martinez looked at the clock on the wall. In about 20 minutes, he said. Can you give me more than that? She asked. Commander Bradley asked to speak first, he said. After that, yes, considerably more. She sat in the vigil chair and let the 20 minutes happen with the patience she had developed for exactly this kind of waiting. Productive patience. The kind that observed and registered and did not waste itself on speculation. Marcus talked. He talked about his mother, who had apparently made an impression on the entire ICU staff in the 36 hours since her arrival. Specifically on Carol, who had told Patricia that Mrs. Cole was the most organized family member she had encountered in 15 years of ICU nursing, which Olivia suspected was either inherited or installed by the same institution that had produced Marcus. He talked about the neurologist's Friday assessment, which had used the word excellent in a context that required no qualification. He talked about a fishing trip he was going to take with his father when he was cleared for travel, described with the specific, forward-looking detail of someone who had recently spent time on the wrong side of the odds and was now fully invested in future plans. She listened and asked questions and let the 20 minutes be what they were, the last quiet passage before whatever was about to happen, happened. At 10:22, Commander Bradley knocked on the open ICU door. She had formed an image of him from the phone call, the cadence of his voice, the specific formal warmth of it, the measured authority. The actual man confirmed most of it and exceeded it in one specific respect, which was that he carried the weight of command with a naturalness that told her it had been earned rather than assumed. The particular bearing of someone for whom responsibility had become as much a part of the body as bone. He was in uniform, full dress, the rows of ribbons she had learned, over 12 years at a military hospital, to read partially. What she could read was considerable. He looked at Marcus first. Petty Officer Cole, he said, you look significantly better than the last report I received. Sir, Marcus said, with the specific quality of someone who had just sat up slightly straighter from an already deliberate position. Then Commander Bradley looked at her. Ms. Hayes, he said, I'm glad to meet you in person. Commander, she said. He looked at her for a moment, not assessing, not the tactical read she had come to recognize from the SEALs, but something more considered. The look of a man who had been given a full account of something and was confirming the account against the actual person. I want to speak with you first, he said, if that's acceptable. Of course, she said. He looked at Torres, Hendricks, Martinez. The three of them moved toward the door with the choreographed efficiency of men who had received nonverbal instruction and were executing it. Torres touched Marcus's arm briefly as he passed the bed. The specific light contact of someone who had been touching an unconscious teammate for 4 days and was still in the habit of confirming presence. Then it was her and Commander Bradley and Marcus in the bed, who was clearly not going to pretend he wasn't listening. I'll be direct, Bradley said. I've spent my career in naval special warfare. I've worked with and observed a significant number of medical professionals over that time. Field medics, trauma surgeons, flight nurses, hospital staff in multiple facilities on multiple continents. He paused. What you did Monday night was not unusual in terms of the clinical skill. Bethesda has exceptional clinicians. What was unusual was everything around the clinical skill. She held his eyes and waited. You asked about his teammates before the helicopter landed, he said. You told them present tense applied. You walked them to the ICU yourself. You talked to an unconscious man in a voice designed to give him something to follow. He stopped. Chief Martinez gave me a very thorough account. He's not a man who uses words like exceptional without precision. He used it 4 times in one phone call. She didn't know what to say, which was unusual for her, so she said nothing and let him continue. Ms. Hayes, 12 years ago when you came to Bethesda, you made a choice about what kind of nurse to be. Not just technically, that kind of choice is implicit in the licensing. A different kind. He looked at her directly. You chose to treat every person in your care as though their life was the most important thing in the room. Not the diagnosis, not the case, the person. He paused. That sounds like it should be the standard. It isn't always. She thought about Dolores in bed 3, who had watched her for 11 years. She thought about the names, all the names, thousands of names. She thought about 12 years of overnight shifts and the voice she had developed in the dark and the promises she had kept without keeping count of them. I just did the job, she said. You did considerably more than the job, he said, and I'm here to say so on behalf of the Navy. On behalf of naval special warfare specifically. He looked at her with the direct attention of a man who had been giving significant recognitions for long enough to know which ones were routine and which ones mattered differently. We don't typically do this. What I'm about to do is not a standard protocol. It's something that happens when someone does something that the standard protocols don't adequately cover. He paused. Do you understand what I'm saying? Not entirely, she said honestly. He nodded, as though he had expected this answer and found it appropriate. Then he turned toward the door and said, in a voice calibrated for the corridor, Chief. The door opened. Martinez came in first, then Torres, then Hendricks, cast and all. And behind them, which she had not expected, which no one had told her, Patricia and Carol from the ICU. And Danny, who was not on shift on Saturday and was wearing street clothes and had apparently come in specifically for this, which meant someone had told Danny and Danny had come. And at the end, walking in slowly and carefully, with the help of a physical therapist she recognized from the 3rd floor, was Dolores Kowalski. Olivia looked at Dolores. Dolores looked back at her with the expression of someone who had been keeping a secret for approximately 48 hours and had found it both delightful and taxing. You knew, Olivia said. Martinez called me Thursday, Dolores said. He asked if I thought you deserved this. I told him the question was insulting and he should proceed immediately. She looked at Martinez. She's persuasive, Martinez said. Commander Bradley stepped forward. From his breast pocket, he produced a small case, the kind she recognized from a dozen military ceremonies she had attended in 12 years of working in a military hospital. The specific flat case that contained something official and permanent and earned. He opened it. Inside was a coin, a challenge coin larger than most, bearing the Naval Special Warfare Trident on one face. On the other face, she could see from the angle he held it, an inscription she couldn't read yet. On behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command, Commander Bradley said, and his voice had shifted into the register she recognized as formal ceremony, the specific tone that had been trained into the delivery of significant things. In recognition of exceptional service to the personnel of Naval Special Warfare and for care provided to Petty Officer First Class Marcus Cole, with a standard of dedication that exceeded every professional requirement and honored the values this command holds above all others. He stopped. He looked at her. "We don't give these to civilians," he said, stepping out of the formal register for a moment, just a moment, into something more direct. "We have never given one to a nurse at a military hospital. This is the first time." He paused. "It will not be the last time, because I intend to change the protocol, but you're the first." She looked at the coin in the case. "Naval Special Warfare Medallion of Honor," he said, "for extraordinary service rendered to the teams." He held it out. She took it with both hands, the way you took something that had weight beyond its physical weight, and she looked at it, the trident, the inscription, the specific heft of a thing that meant what it meant, and she felt the week compress and expand simultaneously. The 12 years, and the last shift, and the helicopter, and the waiting room, and the voice at the bedside, and the weather she had described to an unconscious man at 2 in the morning, all of it present at once in the weight of the coin in her hands. She looked up. Marcus Cole from the bed was watching her with the clear, present eyes that had found hers on Thursday morning and had not let go of something since. He said simply, "Thank you. Not for the coin, not for the formal moment, for the Monday night, the voice, the weather report, the present tense." She nodded once. It was all she had. Then Commander Bradley looked at Martinez, and Martinez looked at Torres and Hendricks. And the three of them, Martinez, Torres, Hendricks, came to attention. In the specific way that SEALs came to attention, which was not performance and not ceremony, but the fullest available expression of a body that had been trained to communicate respect through posture. The way a certain kind of honor required the whole physical self to participate. And they saluted her. Not the quick, efficient salute of a routine protocol, the held salute. The kind that said, "We see you, we mean this, and we are not lowering our hands until you understand what we're saying." The room was completely still. She had been in this hospital for 12 years. She had seen ceremonies and citations and commendations. She had stood at the edges of moments between military personnel that she understood were significant without always knowing their full weight. She had never been the one being saluted. She did not know the right response. There was no protocol for a retired civilian nurse receiving a SEAL salute. She was not in their chain of command. She was not military. There was no manual for this moment. She stood up straighter, her hands at her sides. She held their eyes, Martinez, Torres, Hendricks, one at a time, with the same direct quality she had given patients for 12 years. The specific eye contact that said, "I see you. I take you seriously. I am fully here." Then she nodded. Once, deliberately, the way you acknowledge something true. They lowered their salutes. Danny made a sound from near the door that he immediately controlled. Patricia had her hand pressed against her sternum in the specific gesture of someone whose professional composure was doing significant work. Carol was not pretending to manage her expression at all. Dolores, who had watched Olivia for 11 years and had never required management, said quietly and precisely, "There, that's where you're supposed to be." And for the second time in a week, Dolores Kowalski said the exact right thing. An hour later, after Commander Bradley had gone and the ICU had returned to something approximating its normal rhythm, Olivia sat beside Marcus Cole's bed, alone. The others had given them the room, Martinez with the tactical grace he applied to everything, Torres and Hendricks following without requiring instruction. Marcus had the coin in his hand. She had let him hold it, the way she had held his hand in the early hours of Tuesday morning. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. The question he had not yet asked, the one that had been waiting since she told him on Thursday that it was her last shift. She thought about it honestly. She had been thinking about it since Monday night, in the way significant questions got worked on in the background while the foreground continued. "I'm going to rest," she said, properly, for the first time in 12 years. She paused. "And then I'm going to figure out what the next version of the work looks like." She looked at the coin in his hand, the trident catching the light. I've been doing this work in one form for 12 years. I think there are other forms. He looked at her. Like what? Teaching, she said. Possibly. Working with people who are training to do what I did. Trying to tell them the things that take 12 years to learn and see if it's possible to accelerate them. She paused. The names, specifically. I want to tell them about the names. He was quiet for a moment. You'd be good at that, he said. I don't know yet, she said, but I'm going to find out. He handed the coin back to her. She took it, closed her fingers around it, felt its weight. The fishing trip, she said. When you go with your dad, I want to hear that it happened. I'll tell Martinez, he said. He'll tell you. He will, she agreed, because she understood already that Martinez was the kind of man who kept connections once they were established, who treated people who had mattered in a significant moment as people who continued to matter after the moment resolved. She stood. Cold, clear, no wind, he said. She looked at him. Tuesday night, he said. I'm not going to forget it. Neither am I, she said. She put the coin in her blazer pocket, alongside nothing, unlike the patience she had carried in her memory over 12 years, but significant in its singularity. The first time in 12 years that something had moved in the other direction, not from her to a patient, but from them to her. The acknowledgement that the work had a weight that could be felt from the other side. She walked out of the ICU and through the corridor and past the nurse's station where Danny was, inexplicably on his day off, on a Saturday, reviewing charts with the specific guilty energy of someone who had told himself he was just stopping by for the ceremony and had gotten absorbed anyway. Go home, Danny, she said as she passed. In a minute, he said. She kept walking. She passed the ER on her way out. Through the window, she could see the familiar, organized motion of a Saturday morning. The nurses moving with purpose, the attending reviewing a chart, the specific institutional pulse of a place that ran on competence and didn't stop for anything. She stopped walking. She stood at the ER window for a moment and looked at the nurse's station. Her station, for 12 years, hers in the specific sense that a place becomes yours when you have given it your best work, day after day, until the place and the work become inseparable. She felt it, not grief, not exactly, but the specific weight of a real ending. The kind that didn't arrive until you were leaving for the last time, and looked back and understood the full shape of the thing you were leaving behind. 20 years, thousands of names, every promise kept. She put her hand in her blazer pocket and felt the coin. She turned and walked toward the exit and out into the Saturday morning that was hers to fill, however she decided, carrying everything she had become in this building, every lesson, in every name, in every hour of the voice she had used in the dark to give people something to follow back to the surface. She carried it out into the world with her. It was the most valuable thing she owned, and no one had given it to her. She had built it, piece by piece, shift by shift, name by name, for 12 years. And it would go on being hers for the rest of her life, in whatever form the next chapter of the work took, because the kind of nurse Olivia Hayes had become was not a role she had played. It was simply, completely, and permanently who she was.